So 6 months ago, I posted the first official video to this channel, which was about transferring and talking about advice and tips that I got after doing the NYU to Harvard transfer. Turns out that was the most popular video on my channel so far, so that's probably how most of you found me. Thank you for sticking around. And since then, I've gotten tons of comments about the intricacies of transferring based on, my comment section, and people would Instagram me and all sorts of things. And so I thought I would finally do a part 2, which is a roundup and an FAQ of all of those questions. Disclaimer, obviously I am not related in any way to admissions to any Ivy League, and so this is not proprietary information. This is just what I experienced and what I observed. Also, this is from a few years back and things could totally have changed, and so you should Google any hard questions you have about requirements for transferring. Okay, question number 1. Were any transfers able to graduate on time in the traditional sense of completing only 8 semesters? Also, it's too hot with the lights here. So the answer is it depends, and it depends on how many of the credits from your previous school are going to transfer. You also get that information at different times. So I was admitted to Yale and Harvard. Yale told me what courses would transfer prior to the admissions date, like when you have to choose what school you go to. Harvard actually told me afterwards. I fell in the category of people who lost a ton of credits. I actually lost a year's worth of credits. An average semester has 4 classes. If 3 of those classes didn't count, they actually round you down to the nearest semester. So for me, I think 7 of my classes didn't count, so I lost a year's worth of credits. I would say the middle category is people who lost some credits, like maybe down to a semester, but didn't lose a ton of credits. And then there's a category of people, very few of them, but there were still people in this category who all of their credits transferred. In terms of what's going to influence what transfers, I would say one thing that somewhat influences it is like what type of school you came from. So I came from a vocational school because it was a business school, and so Harvard, being a liberal arts college, whatever, did not accept a lot of those classes. Like, for example, they didn't accept stats for business because it had the for business part, but they had an equivalent stats requirement that I didn't meet. The easiest way to finish on time, I found, is people who are transferring from the same major into this same major at their new school. Partially because you probably have similar requirements for like mechanical engineering at the school and mechanical engineering at your new school, but also partially because you can go to the department heads and then argue that classes that didn't transfer deserve to transfer because you can show them the syllabus and challenge that. In my case, I was like brand new type of school and also brand new, majors and all of that, and so there was nothing I could do other than try to overload to minimize the amount of time that I would spend. So by the way, like let's say you lost 1 semester, but you decide to overload your classes every semester, you could still finish in 8 semesters. Also, Harvard used to have this thing, or maybe still does, I haven't checked, where they have a requirement of essentially doing 8 semesters worth of credits, but transfer students could actually do an extra semester because they know that it's hard to fit into a new place. Okay, we gotta be faster than that answer. So question number 2. What major do I need to study to transfer? The good news is it doesn't matter what you study if you're trying to transfer to a liberal arts college, be like all of the Ivy Leagues are, because they just don't care. They need you to slot into their system. They don't really care what major you came in with. 3, do you transfer into a specific program or major? So what's actually cool is when I got admitted, I was like, I know exactly what I want to study, and the person who was talking to me, who was counseling me, was like, actually, you can choose whatever you want. We don't care at all. So by and large, you don't need to transfer because you did business before into something business related, or because you did economics before into economics. For most liberal arts colleges, the requirements needed to fulfill any major is such that you can change your mind quite a bit and still be able to graduate with a degree in that major. There's minor exceptions to this. So for example, Yale's PPE program is very competitive, and freshmen actually, I think, have to apply into it and get into it and start studying it sophomore year. And so if you want to transfer into that program, and that's very specific, I think there are specific requirements, and you may not be able to do it unless you meet those requirements. But by and large, you can transfer into anything and still have time to change your mind and still graduate with whatever degree you want. That's one of the beauties of liberal arts education. Question 4, how many colleges did I apply to transfer to? I applied to transfer to 5 colleges, and the way I thought about that was I want to enjoy the experience that I'm having at NYU. I also have like my own crap that I'm trying to figure out, like my grades and my friends and extracurriculars. And so I didn't want to spend all of my life just writing these transfer applications. So I only wrote and applied to schools that I would rather go to. And that list was very short. Okay, question 5. Can I transfer from another country? Is it harder to transfer as an international student? So yes, you can transfer from another country. I had friends who transferred from colleges in the UK, colleges in South Africa, colleges in Canada, etc. And yes, you can transfer as an international student, and I don't think it's harder in the sense that one of the nice things about the Ivies is that they don't have preference for taking students from, for example, their state or even from their country. And so technically you have like an equal chance as anyone else, obviously acknowledging the fact that you probably understand the system less as an international student, so it's like trickier practically, but it's not trickier in terms of them preferencing other groups over you. Question 6, what extracurriculars did I do prior to transferring? People love this question of like, can I compare myself to you so that it makes me feel better or worse about my chances? I know it's so human, it's like not a good question, but I will say during my freshman and sophomore year at NYU, my extracurriculars were a lot more cohesive than my extracurriculars were in high school, in the sense that in high school I did a lot of things, but in NYU, I started developing an interest in a very specific field, which was around technology, and also specifically within technology, like technology for social good. So I was part of like a tech social impact club. I was part of tech at NYU. I was working for this female VC. I was, part of like multiple startups. I started really developing a narrative around my extracurriculars, and that's probably one of the things that made my transfer application stronger than had I applied, out of high school. Question 7, can I transfer from X worst ranked school to an Ivy League? Just fill in the blank here. Can I transfer from a community college to Brown? Can I transfer from NYU to I get that type of question a lot. The answer is a resounding yes. One of the things I've said is that the transfer class I find is often, it's not weirder, but it's a little bit weirder than the even entire class, because they're looking for diversity. They've already filled out a class. They want to add interesting, members to the community. And so you will find so many people who come from all sorts of interesting backgrounds that are not like the typical snooty Ivy League background, for example. Lots of people from community college every year, people who were ex-military, people who came from other Ivies, people who came from not Ivies. Really, you can transfer from any school to any school, period. 8, is my SAT, ACT score high enough, / is my GPA competitive, / are my extracurriculars competitive? I know you hate this question and answer, but the answer is I don't know, just like you don't know, because the process for admissions to an Ivy League is genuinely holistic. They do have, I think, not minimum bars, but they do have median scores that you can literally Google and find to see, do you fit into what percentile of the students that have previously been admitted? But from there on out, they take each section of your application, grades, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, essays, holistically to admit people. I hate to say that. I wish I could give you an answer of whether your score was high enough. Trust me, I was in that boat. I totally know what it feels like. But the answer is, once you've met some minimum requirement, from there it's holistic, and all you have to do is apply, because if you don't apply, you will never know. Question 9, you observed me that your transfer class was weirder. Do you have examples of that? And is there reasoning for that? Yes, and I'll share an example of someone who I'm really good friends with, so I hope they don't get mad. But essentially, they were in the military for 9 years. They were at a community college, had a very low GPA, did the military thing, super, super smart, and ended up in my transfer class. And I think a lot of people fit into sort of really, really interesting backgrounds. And I do think the reasoning for that, it's not to say that if you don't have an interesting background, you're not going to get admitted, because lots of people who were just great students, super smart, whatever, were admitted as you would expect. I do think, like I said, that because the transfer class is after the vast majority of the class has already been made, they're trying to see who will add to the community and who, not necessarily just the person who will be the 20th person who fits this profile, but rather the one unique you that you are. Okay, next question. Did you have an interview? This is actually one of the most common questions I get asked, and the answer is yes for some schools. So they explicitly say, at least when I applied, that transfers don't usually get an interview. So I did get admitted to Yale, for example, without an interview, but I also got admitted to Harvard with an interview, even though they said that they don't usually interview people or transfer students. So I think the answer depends. I think if you get an interview, it probably is like a good sign, but if you don't get an interview, it also doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad sign. How did you practice for the interview? So like all interviews, which I've talked a lot about interviews on this channel actually, what I do is I write down a list of commonly asked questions and I practice them in front of a mirror so that you can see all of the weird things you do with your face, the weird things you do with your arms. I'm not at all saying you should memorize answers for any interview. I'm just saying that, quite frankly, they're going to ask you certain questions like, tell me about yourself, tell me about this experience on your resume, or tell me about this experience on your extracurricular list. Like, it's just pretty obvious that they're going to ask those questions. And so you should have a vague sense of where you're going so that your answers are complete and also a proper representation of what you want to say. Okay, next, did you mention financial aid in your application? This is an interesting question because I think it's hinting at like, can you talk about finances, or is that like a really uncomfortable topic that you're not supposed to write about? So technically, all of your financial aid considerations are sent separately. Like you have your admissions essay and then you have like a financial package that you send them. And actually, even when you get admitted, you get an admissions package and then you have like the financial aid package very, very separately. I think though, if you want to mention finances in your essay, and that's very authentic to your story, then of course that's something you can include. That's something I did briefly mention as one of the reasons I want to transfer. And also if finances influence, like were a really, really big part of your story, there's also an additional essay section where you can write about anything. And I think it's appropriate to mention finances if finances is something that's like been really influential in your life. Okay, how did you know when your essays were complete? This is an interesting question. I actually have a weird story where I wrote all of my applications for all 5 colleges in 1 week, and I just took 1 day per application during winter break. And then every Sunday up until when the deadline was, which I think was early March, I would spend time editing it. Now, actually, by the time the application deadline rolled around, I was like, oh my God, I haven't edited this in a while. So I just sort of last minute did it on a Sunday, and then I was up against a deadline, so I submitted it. I know some people who like systematically drafted their essay like 20 times. So it really depends on you. At some point, you just have to submit, and as soon as you press submit, you need to be like, I tried the best that I can, and I would be super happy if I stayed, and I'm glad I took a shot, and I'm proud of myself for that. You can't freak out about it, essentially. So next question is, did you use the entire word count for all the essays? This is actually an interesting question because I almost didn't, and then I ended up using the word count for all of them. There was a question that was like, what would you do if you stayed at your school or something? And I almost submitted like 1 sentence because I was like, this is a silly question. Like, I would stay at my school. Like, what else do you want from me? But then I thought about it and I decided that every piece of the application is the only chance for you to try and, make your case essentially. And so you want to use it to the fullest of your abilities. So I decided to use that essay to say something about myself and say something about like the philosophy I had towards life, towards staying, towards going, etc. So yes, I actually would recommend using all the parts of the application that they give you if they give it to you. How do you balance writing transfer applications while still doing school? So for myself, I would say it's very important, if you can, to try and focus on where you are and being happy where you are, because if you always live for the future, you're going to be one very sad person. And so for me, what I did with transferring is just time boxing my application. So I spent 1 day, like 8 hours per application, just writing like this school. So every day I would convince myself, I really want to go to Yale. I'm going to write the Yale application. And the next day I'd be like, I really want to go to Harvard. And then I would write the Harvard application. I did that for 5 days. And then every Sunday afternoon, I would spend between blah and blah, between like 2 and 5 o'clock or something, or 2 and 4 o'clock or whatever, writing the transfer application. I also love writing on trains. Like, I love writing when I'm traveling. So during a long train ride, I was like, I'm just going to edit all of my essays and submit after this. So time boxing is my answer. Can you transfer after freshman year? How does that affect your application? So I transferred after sophomore year, but I also know a lot of people who transferred after freshman year. I would say the big difference, I imagine, is that if you want to apply freshman year, you've only had like max a few months at your college to have decided that you want to transfer and then to have, prepared your application and whatnot, which means that I bet your application heavily depends on what you did in high school versus for me, for example, by sophomore year, my application was almost entirely what I did in college, which I think is to my advantage because I think I just learned a lot more about myself and I had a much more cohesive narrative in college than I perhaps did in high school. So it does affect your application perhaps in that way, but people get admitted out of both classes all the time. Going along with that, how much emphasis is put on your high school application? Again, like I said, it really depends on when you apply. For me, I've actually compared my NYU application with my Harvard application in terms of the Common App, which is the piece that's the same that's submitted to all the schools, and they were almost completely different except for maybe one activity. So for me, my application didn't rely on my high school application almost at all. For other people, that might be different. Also, note that I actually didn't apply to any of these schools during high school because I was doing early decision at NYU. So they didn't have my name in the system or anything. I don't know if that makes a difference on your application or not, but for me, my high school application and my transfer application were nothing alike. Does having one low grade affect the rest of your application? Again, I'm not an admissions officer, and again, I hate that the answer is holistic, so I don't know. But what I will say is that there are pieces of your section in which you can justify freeform, write anything that you want. So for example, if you have a random B when you only got A's, I swear it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. I know it's hard to believe it's gonna be okay, but it's gonna be okay. But let's say you have something that you feel really bad about and you want to justify it. For example, something bad happened and you did really crappy, you did really, really crappy in a class or you did really, really crappy in a semester. You can justify that in certain parts of your application under additional information. I actually did that about my grades at one point. So, I think it's something that you should be aware of. Okay, question is, I don't have grades for this year yet, the year that I'm currently in. How do I apply? So, when you apply, by the time you submit the application, I think you get 1 semester's worth of grades, but you won't have obviously the grades from your current semester. So there is actually a form, at least for Harvard, called the mid-year reporting form, in which, for example, during my official application, I submitted my fall semester grades, and then this mid-year report is the mid-year of my spring semester, and I asked all my teachers to predict what my grade will be. So that's actually how you submit extra grades as the year is progressing. How did you form a bond with your letters of recommendations, and was it weird asking them for a letter of recommendation since you're asking to transfer? So I'll answer this in 2 parts. The first is, actually one of the greatest things about college is if you make friends with some of your teachers. I know it sounds silly, but it's true. And I think you can do that in a lot of ways. I'd say the simplest way is by being a great student, like someone who really talks up in class so the teacher knows your name, they rely on you being a great student. A little amped up version of that is someone who goes to office hours and spends that extra time talking to that professor and knowing more about the subject and knowing more about them personally. And then you can even amp it up more. I didn't reach this with my letters of recommendation, but you can amp it up more by choosing a professor who you've worked with. So maybe you did a research project together with them, or you're helping out with their work in some way. Obviously that would be the best letter of recommendation, but I think those are the levels that you can achieve with getting a good letter of recommendation. Second part, I wish the answer was that it was never weird, but honestly sometimes it is, it depends. So for example, one of the teachers that I actually wanted to ask for a letter of recommendation for also was pretty high up at the school in terms of administration. And when I broached the subject of wanting to transfer, they were pretty not happy about it. And so I ended up not asking them because I thought that they might write like a not amazing recommendation, versus when I asked just teachers who were like super uninvolved with administration, they were super happy to. So I would say by and large, it's not going to be weird. If it is weird, you can just pick someone else. We're almost done here. Should I submit extra materials? I would say if they have room for extra materials. So for example, when I was applying, they said you can but don't have to submit an extra letter recommendation. I think it was you can but don't have to submit a mid-year report. If they give you the space to like that, then yes, you can do so if you think it'll help your application. So they said you can, but you don't have to submit an arts portfolio. I didn't have an arts portfolio, so I didn't submit one, but I did submit an extra letter of recommendation from an extracurricular that was really important to me and I thought could speak well to myself. But I wouldn't recommend sending random extra material that they did not ask for. So sending like 4 extra letters of recommendation or sending over something that like they completely can't receive is probably not a great idea. Is it harder to make friends as a transfer student? Yeah, like I would say so, in the sense that other people have already had 1 or 2 years on you in order to solidify their friendships with their roommates, with people in their classes, with extracurriculars, with Greek or life or whatever. Like, that's just the reality of things. I think what that means is you as a transfer student need to put extra time into making friendships and giving to community if you want to make up for those previous years that you missed. This is a funny question. Does attending an Ivy League mean that you just study all the time and don't have any fun? Yes. No, I'm kidding. The answer is no. Yeah, like Ivy League students are literally the same as everyone else. That's probably not quite true. Depending on the school, they might go out more or less. Depending on the school, they might have a study all the time culture or not, but if you want to go out, you will find a chance to go out. If you want to study all the time, you can study all the time. Just like anywhere else, you can be yourself and find your people. What did you do wrong as a transfer? So, no one's actually asked me this, but I just want to answer this, which is that I think I focused too much on the fact that I changed majors and was changing careers, and so I felt super anxious about that, and so I changed my whole life at Harvard to be around this person that I wanted to be. I changed my extracurriculars, I academically overloaded, essentially my whole social life, like all of these things were around computer science and switching into tech, something I was feeling very insecure about because I felt that other people had 2 years on me to be good at this field and I wasn't good at this field. The reason why it's definitely my biggest mistake is because the time you put into those things is the time that you don't put into friendships and into social relationships, which at the end of everything is literally all you have. It's funny because I thought that what you took from like a fancy Harvard degree was the fact that you have the fancy Harvard name, and that's somewhat true, but really what makes any of these schools amazing is the people you meet. They will be a huge important part of your life forever, and so I actually made a whole video about this that I will link above. Okay, so this is probably going to be a long video, and I think that's got to be like most of the questions people have, right? But if you do have more questions, feel free to leave them down below. Subscribe, comment, like, whatever, and I will respond to you quickly, maybe even make another video. So yeah, see you in the future.